You wake up not to an alarm, but to a weight. It's not in your chest, not quite in your head either, more like a fog behind your eyes. The sun cuts through the blinds, but even light feels heavy. There's no emergency, no deadline, just a dull, suffocating absence of direction. You reach for your phone, not because you want to, but because it's easier than facing the ache of another blank day. Scroll, like, scroll, envy, scroll, regret. You're not in danger. You're not in crisis. But you're not really living either. You think to yourself, I should do something. Maybe open that book, start that project, go outside, call someone, move. But all those thoughts flicker and fade into the background hum of your mind like radio static. You lie there, still, not because you're lazy, but because you don't know why you should move. And that's when it hits you. You're not tired of doing too much. You're exhausted by doing nothing that matters. People around you seem to have motion, momentum, purpose even. But you're stuck in this strange twilight where time slips by but you stay the same. And the worst part is that you blame yourself for it. For being lazy, unmotivated, undisciplined, for not being enough, for letting the world pass you by. You call yourself a failure for not living up to the expectations you never even chose. But here's the paradox no one talks about. What if you're not lazy at all? What if your so-called laziness is the natural response of a soul that's lost its sense of direction? What if procrastination is just grief in disguise, a mourning for the life you haven't found yet? What if your body resists action, not because it's weak, but because the path you're forcing it toward doesn't belong to you? No one ever asks, what is this laziness pointing to? We're so quick to diagnose slowness as failure, to name restlessness as brokenness, to label stillness as waste. But no one wonders, what if this isn't about productivity at all? What if it's a crisis of meaning? Have you ever noticed how you become most productive when something finally makes sense to you? When there's a spark, an alignment between what you're doing and who you are. Suddenly, you're focused, driven, alive. Not because you tried harder, but because for a moment, you knew where you were going. That's the real question, hiding under the accusation of laziness. What if you're not meant to be more efficient, but more aligned? Society doesn't want you to ask that. It needs you to believe you're broken. It thrives on your confusion, sells you routines and self-help scripts to fix what might not be broken at all. It keeps you addicted to the illusion that if you just worked harder, meditated longer, optimized better, you'd finally get your life together. But what if the problem isn't your lack of motivation? What if the real problem is that you're chasing a life that doesn't speak to your soul? You scroll past other people's lives, crafted, filtered, glorified, and something inside you stirs. Why don't I feel that way? You wonder, why can't I be like them? But the truth is, you weren't meant to be like them. Their path is not yours. And that restless ache inside you isn't a bug. It's a signal, a whisper from the parts of you that still remember who you are beneath the noise. You're not lazy. You're trying to survive in a world that never taught you how to find your own meaning. You were raised on grades and gold stars, on likes and follower counts, told to chase goals before you ever learned how to ask what you truly value. You were programmed to move, but not to know why. So when you stop, When your body rebels against motion without purpose, you blame yourself. Instead of listening, you shame. But what if this standstill is sacred? What if this fog, this pause, this aching stillness isn't your downfall, but the beginning of your becoming? What if the real question isn't how do I stop being lazy, but rather, what is the purpose I've been disconnected from? What vision have I been too afraid or too distracted to see? What part of me is waiting to be found beneath this silence? You're not defective. You're disoriented. You're not weak. You're waiting, not for motivation, not for energy, but for a reason to rise. And that reason is not going to come from a productivity hack. It's going to come from something deeper, older, something within you that hasn't been given language yet. So sit with that, not as a flaw, but as a clue. Because this isn't where the story ends, it's where it finally begins. Where does this quiet kind of suffering come from? The kind where your life looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. To answer that, we have to go deeper than surface level explanations, like bad habits or low discipline. We have to trace the roots through your psyche, through the frameworks of a society obsessed with performance, and into the forgotten corners of your soul. What you're experiencing isn't laziness. It's the symptom of a deeper psychological and philosophical fracture. Carl Jung called it the loss of connection with the self. Not the ego, the curated, socialized mask we wear, but the deeper self that holds our instincts, our desires, our symbols, and our purpose. When you become estranged from that self, your outer life starts to feel meaningless. You follow scripts that don't resonate. You go through motions that don't nourish. And your mind, sensing this disconnect, rebels, not with rage, but with apathy. This is the hidden rebellion of the psyche. And it often begins early. From a young age, you were praised not for who you were, but for how well you performed. Gold stars for obedience, applause for fitting in, attention for achievement. Slowly, a dangerous lesson was etched into your mind. Your worth is conditional. You learned that productivity equals value, that success equals identity, that quietness equals laziness. You were never asked, what stirs your soul? You were told, pick something practical. You were never shown how to face your shadow, the part of you that holds suppressed desires, fears, and truths. Instead, you were taught to hide it, ignore it, suppress it. But what you suppress doesn't disappear. It festers, and eventually, it takes form as depression, stagnation, burnout. What society calls laziness is often the soul screaming through the cracks of repression. Jung believed that symptoms are not enemies to be destroyed, but messages to be decoded. Now ask yourself, what is this fatigue trying to tell me? What part of myself have I buried to survive in a world that doesn't see me? Enter Friedrich Nietzsche, who once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." This wasn't just philosophical musing. It was a direct challenge to a modern world that strips individuals of authentic meaning and replaces it with shallow reward systems. He foresaw the existential vacuum we live in today, a world where people know how to make money, but don't know why they're alive. You can hustle, you can grind, but without a deeper why, you're running on fumes. Nietzsche warned of this emptiness. He called it nihilism, the state of realizing that the values you were taught no longer hold meaning. When nothing feels sacred, Every task becomes a burden. Every dream feels fake. And so the body slows down, not from laziness, but from philosophical despair. You're not unwilling. You're unanchored. Schopenhauer, darker and more brutally honest, believed that life itself was suffering, that desire, by its nature, created discontent. But even he recognized that transcendence was possible, not by chasing pleasure, but by awakening consciousness. He suggested that relief comes not through more achievement, but through deeper awareness. Awareness of what? Of the absurdity of chasing dreams that aren't yours, of the cruelty of calling yourself lazy when your spirit is starving, of the prison built around your mind, dressed up as a normal life. Then came Jean-Paul Sartre, who flipped the script. He declared that life had no inherent meaning, but that freedom, terrifying as it is, was ours, that you are condemned to be free, that your identity is not fixed, but forged. And so, your existential stagnation isn't failure. It's an unopened door, a choice you haven't made yet, the burden of shaping a life without a map. This freedom, Sartre argued, creates angst, the anxiety of infinite possibilities, the dread of choosing wrongly. So instead of choosing, many people freeze. They call it procrastination. But really, it's paralysis in the face of self-creation. Can you feel it now? This fog you've been lost in. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of willpower. It's the side effect of being severed from yourself, from your why, from your existential authorship. And modern society only makes it worse. Because instead of helping you navigate this crisis of identity and meaning, the world offers dopamine band-aids. It tells you to hustle harder, consume more, numb quicker. Entertainment becomes anesthesia. Technology becomes a god. And the soul? Forgotten. Aldous Huxley saw this coming. In Brave New World, he warned of a society where control didn't come through oppression, but through pleasure, through distraction, through comfort. And isn't that exactly what we see today? A generation drowning not in suffering, but in meaningless abundance. 1,000 choices, but no guidance. Infinite content, but no connection. You were promised freedom, but no one told you. There's a cost to living without direction, but it doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly, quietly, like mold behind a painted wall. First, it begins with apathy. You stop caring about the things that once sparked even a flicker of joy. Hobbies become chores. Socializing feels like performance. Even rest becomes restless. You scroll endlessly, not because you're entertained, but because stopping would mean facing the silence. And in that silence, something terrifying waits. The question of why you're even here. Then comes the shame. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, corrosive kind. The kind that seeps into your thoughts every time you hesitate, every time you stay in bed, every time you cancel plans or procrastinate. It whispers, you're lazy, you're wasting your life, you're not enough. It pretends to be motivation, but it's poison. It convinces you that you are the problem, when in truth, the problem is much older, much deeper, much less personal. What no one tells you is that the world you live in is perfectly designed to create this state of spiritual paralysis. The modern age is obsessed with action, but allergic to meaning. Productivity is worshipped. Reflection is seen as weakness. You are told to move, but not to think. To achieve, but not to understand. So, you become a vessel for tasks and timelines and metrics, without ever asking what all of it is for. This creates a subtle, yet devastating form of alienation. You become a stranger to your own life. You look at your calendar and feel like someone else wrote it. You hear your voice in conversations and wonder if you're just performing. You set goals, chase them, achieve them, and then feel nothing. You laugh in public and cry when you're alone. And through it all, you begin to wonder, is this it? Is this all there is? That question, quiet as it is radioactive. Because once it takes root, the old answers no longer satisfy you. You start to notice the cracks in the facade, how social media performs meaning but rarely holds it, how school teaches obedience but not wisdom. Instead of meaning, performance instead of presence. And the longer this continues, the more your inner world begins to fracture. The psychologist Gabor Mate speaks of this disconnection as trauma. Not the dramatic, visible kind, but the quiet rupture between your inner truth and your outer reality. He says that the real question is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And in this context, what happened is this. You were born into a world that taught you to betray yourself to belong, to abandon intuition for instruction, to silence your voice in exchange for validation, to trade purpose for productivity, and then hate yourself for being unfulfilled. This is the unseen consequence, spiritual self-abandonment. It looks like chronic procrastination, but it's actually dissonance. It looks like laziness, but it's really a revolt of the soul. It looks like weakness, but it's the quiet pain of being exiled from your own authenticity. And over time, this disconnect doesn't just affect your energy or mood, it warps your identity. You begin to internalize the world's expectations as your own. You forget what you actually want. You doubt your own instincts. You censor your thoughts before they're even fully formed. You fear stillness because it might reveal truths you're not ready to face. This is how people lose themselves, not in one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 quiet compromises. It's why so many brilliant, sensitive, thoughtful people spiral into burnout. Not because they can't handle the pressure, but because they've been pressured into becoming someone they're not. And when you live this way for too long, something even more dangerous begins to happen. You stop trusting yourself. Your intuition atrophies. Your desires feel foreign. Your inner compass spins wildly, unable to point north. So you begin to rely on others to tell you what to do, who to be, how to live. You outsource your identity to algorithms, influencers, ideologies. And in doing so, you become easy to manipulate. Easy to sell to, easy to control, because a lost person is a compliant person. A numb person is a predictable one. And a distracted mind is the most profitable of all. This isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han wrote about what he calls the burnout society, a world where we are no longer oppressed by external forces, but by internalized pressure to constantly self-optimize. We become our own slave drivers. We exploit ourselves in the name of growth. And when we collapse, we blame ourselves for not being stronger. But here's the final, most haunting consequence of all. You start to believe the lie, that this is just how life is, that the spark you once had was childish, that clarity is a myth, that meaning is for the lucky, the talented, the chosen, that you are destined to drift. And that's when the final stage of disconnection sets in. You stop looking, you stop asking questions, you stop challenging the narrative, you stop reaching inward, you resign, you become numb but functional, lost but polite, quiet but never still, but not because you're lazy, because you forgot that there was another way.